Longtime viewers know all about Astro Port by now, with such titles as Gigantic Army, Armed 7, Steel Strider, Supercharged Robot Volkaiser, and more already seeing review on Bullet Heaven. Astro Port has become a pretty common sight on this channel, with their signature flair infused into traditional Horis, Verts, and Run and Gunners. But what's this? A tank-based game tailor-made for PC? Cho Sensha Sen Adventia, otherwise known as Super Tank Warefare Adventia, is an arena-style shooting game for Windows PC, originally released in 2012 on CD-ROM and direct download by Astro Port. And like a lot of the games we've been playing as of late, this one is also another that we've been really interested in, but have never tracked down. Having found the CD-ROM brand new for cheap, it was definitely time to give this one a whirl, so let's take a closer look. Adventia is a lot like other shooting games such as Granada, Guardian Force, and Assault. Players will be able to move their tank independently of their fire direction, much like a twin-stick shooter, but it lacks a twin-stick control scheme. Before we take a look at that though, let's take a look at the cast. On the outset of the game, players have their choice of up to 3 characters out of 5 to crew the super tank, Adventia. The main character, a red-headed American girl named Lucy, is always chosen by default and gives the player access to Adventia's main cannon. Tanya is a Soviet soldier that uses a supersized shotgun-style riot gun. Joyce is the resident Brit who enables the use of an explosive howitzer that can clear physical obstacles to attack at a distance. Frida is a German girl who uses an up-close and personal flamethrower to dish major damage. Finally, Mel is a mysterious doll-like girl who attacks with a yo-yo-style electric ball. This ball also acts like a shield in some cases and can cause quite a bit of damage. Each of these characters have different hit point values that make for a strategic approach to how the player will take on the game. Typically, we prefer having at least one indirect character and one that can dish a lot of damage in a very short time. Each character correlates to the weapon in play, which is selected with a dedicated input that will cycle through them. If the active character has her HP reduced to 0, they will be disabled until the next stage. Their attack power is typically balanced with the type of fire that they've got. Lucy, for example, has the weakest shots of the crew but has the most HP, making her a good fallback if the rest of the crew falls. The Adventia also has limited fuel as well, so the longer a player takes in the stage they're in, the more it will deplete. The player's fuel and character HP recovers between stages, but often won't completely refill if their values are too low. This could force the need to speed through a stage at the expense of collecting money for upgrades at times, since ultimately fuel is more important than upgrades. Generally speaking, there are 2 camps that this game will fall into with its actual control. Those that want to play with a controller using turret rotation mapped to the L and R buttons and attacks to the face buttons, or those that prefer keyboard and mouse using WASD or the arrow keys and the left and right mouse buttons for weapon management. The mouse itself makes for a very fast and precise aiming tool while players move about with the WASD or arrow key setup. Of course, all of these inputs can also be remapped, whether on a gamepad or keyboard and mouse. In the case of a gamepad, Xbox-style pads will only be usable with an analog stick, and the control mapping is a little wonky thanks to the L and R triggers in specific. While the bumpers can have functions mapped to them, the triggers cannot. But you know what works really well for digital control? The freaking controllers that came with the PlayStation Classic. Who knew? Any function can be put to any face or shoulder button on this controller, which works really well. In fact, they feel fantastic, and we only really figured that out after we got most of this footage. That said, while we were playing here, we settled on a strange hybrid. Analog stick movement and mouse aim and weapon management. It worked uncannily well with fast responsive aiming and efficient weapon changes paired with really precise movement. The object of Super Tank Warfare Adventia is for the player to make their way to and destroy a predetermined target. These targets are indicated on the screen by red triangles. Along the way, a number of different enemy units will close in on the player in an attempt to thwart their efforts. As the game progresses, larger and more powerful units will be encountered, raising the difficulty accordingly. There are even traps like landmines and motion sensors that can really do a number on the player if they are not careful. Especially in the case of landmines, a huge amount of damage can be done to the player in very little time. On the other hand, players can trick enemies into rolling over these mines as well, which is a nice little twist. There are also enemy emplacements that can cause a huge blast when destroyed. Any enemies in these blasts can be heavily damaged or destroyed as a result. While most of the main objectives in Adventia are static emplacements or inert cores at the end of the many gauntlets that the game throws at the player, a number of giant bosses are also encountered at set intervals. Some of these boss encounters are pretty imaginative, especially when it comes to some of the largest enemies in the game. All enemies destroyed will award the player with money that can be used between stages to enhance the Adventia with various upgrades. Of course, the higher the upgrade, the more it will cost, so players may need to strategize as they make their way through the game, such as whether to boost a specific character's firepower, enhance the Adventia's armor, or increase its overall speed. Once the upgrades are either in place or skipped, the player then progresses to the next stage. On the whole, Super Tank Warfare Adventia is a pretty easy game on normal and below. Advanced players will probably want to ratchet the difficulty up in an effort to make Adventia's 25 stages more challenging. Additionally, despite its large number of stages, Super Tank Warfare Adventia isn't a particularly long game, and players should be able to clock in a clear at about an hour or so, barring any continues. Super Tank Warfare Adventia isn't an especially complex game when it comes to its scoring. More or less, so long as players can take out as many enemies as possible, their score will rise in kind. Every stage also has a bonus phase, which takes the length of time the stage is completed, the percentage of enemy forces destroyed, and damage sustained into account for a percentile score. This percentile is then multiplied by a base point value that changes according to the difficulty played, then applied to the score. The higher the difficulty, the more this value will be. Since Adventia has a save system, players need not worry about losing their scores. They can pick right back up where they left off if they end up getting game over or if they need to take a break. This title in specific does not have any online leaderboard ranking, so a screen capture, taken with the handy input in the game's core controls, is all players need to chronicle their final tallies post-game. It's simple, but it works. There's no doubt here that Super Tank Warfare is a pretty typical Doujin game from a presentation point of view. It definitely has that signature Doujin flavor that so many other games from so many other groups seem to also incorporate. Visually, Adventia isn't exactly a game to write home about. Astro didn't even get on the HD bandwagon until 2015's Zengeki Warp, which we also took a look at in episode 167 of Bullet Heaven, and even then it was only 720p. While Adventia runs natively at 480p, a larger windowed setting does exist, though the visuals get noticeably rough in doing so. We don't seem to mind this too much, though we wish better scaling options existed, even if it means using an external window sizer, which doesn't seem to work, by the way. Either way, these visual issues don't get too much in the way of Adventia's great character design and clear visuals. The ground patterns look pretty great, the enemies are well defined, and the shots are easy to see. However, some people might get dizzy from whipping the screen around, especially using a mouse. Sound-wise, Adventia features some neat music tracks, with the intro and boss themes really sticking out. Others have a decidedly Astro feel, just as games like Wolfflame, Zengeki Warp, Steel Strider, and the PC version of Gigantic Army did. But the sound effects are definitely an order louder, at least, than they ought to be, which often drowns out a lot of the music. Options do exist to tweak these levels, though. Speaking of sound effects, a huge number of effects are present here that, at this point, have become synonymous, and even cliché, of Japanese doujin games. It's like every doujin has these same effects. Maybe there's some hidden contractual obligation in Japan that every doujin creator must use them. They're in like every single one. Rounding out the presentation is a museum gallery of all of the defeated tanks in the game with specifications and countries of origin in tow. There are also a number of expositional story scenes at certain intervals in the game that change depending what characters have been selected. There's a bit of a catch though, it's all in Japanese. At least on the CD version, there has to be English patches out there somewhere. So how does Super Tank Warfare Adventia stack up? Let's take a look. Adventia's control setup is pretty unconventional as far as shooting games go, but they work. Hybridizing between gamepad and mouse seems to be best. Adventia is an easy game. Ratchet this one up to hard and beyond. 25 stages sounds like a lot of length, but many of the stages in Adventia are pretty short. Adventia has pretty clear visuals, but they are also simple. Low resolution and rough-scaled windows make for a squinty time. The music in Adventia works well, but its effects are a little overblown and a bit too loud for their own good. They are also super cliché doujin fare. Super Tank Warfare Adventia is actually pretty similar to a surprising amount of games out there, but spices things up with the several characters at once setup, upgrades, and interesting control schemes. Pretty good stuff all told, but nothing mind-blowing. The CD version of Adventia can still be had for about 1,800 yen, or about $16 US, at places like Nanapo Store. But the downloadable version can be had at DL site for half that or less. Links to both can be found below. In any case, Adventia is very well priced. Super Tank Warfare Adventia was probably worth the wait. It's pretty simple, but it's also a decent amount of fun in the end. On a technical level, there's really not a ton to it, but sometimes that doesn't keep a game from being fun in a sit-back and relax kind of way. Super Tank Warefare Adventia gets a 3.25 out of 5. You can get CD-ROM copies and digital downloads of Super Tank Warefare Adventia using the links below. I love me a good Doujin game, that's for sure. Sooner rather than later, we'll be taking a look at a very obscure one, which is sure to intrigue just as much as it will confuse. Until then, STGC number 3 is shaping up nicely, and should see a release very soon. See you all in the next episode.